Greetings from Portugal. I have sold my lovely house and land in the Hudson Valley, and I am temporarily ensconced in an apartment in Portugal. Don't have my music equipment, don't have my editing equipment, so I'm just going to do a quick one off the cuff without a script about Andy Edwards and high information music. Do you guys know Andy Edwards? Even if you didn't know Andy Edwards, you probably do now because he's just been on Rick Beato's show. By the way, I just heard a chicken. You may hear chickens. You may hear sheep bells. You may hear the cat in heat that's been moaning outside of my house for the last few days. So I apologize. Maybe I don't apologize. Maybe it's going to be a high information video with all of this other audio going on. Andy Edwards is somebody I've been watching for years, and his output is stupendous, and his intelligence is stupendous. He's a very smart guy. Some of the funny things about Andy is he hates posh people, which in English means upper class. Of course, it has connotations of being snotty and conceited and looking down your nose. And the funny thing is that Andy looks down his nose at posh people. So if you have two bands that are great, and one of them is like working class stiffs who got scholarship into art school or met working as baristas, that's cool. And if they're rich boys who also happen to be great musicians, well, then they're just not quite as cool. I personally don't give a fuck, right? I don't give a fuck. I just care what the music's like. But I was just hearing Rick and Andy talking about Mahavishnu Orchestra and Birds of Fire and Billy Cobham, the song Flash Flood. And I've heard Andy talk about people like Steve Vai and Joe Satriani, who I personally cannot stand their music. I don't know them as people. I think they are technically unbelievable. I would kill to have Steve Vai's chops, but their compositions don't move me. And as a matter of fact, I was a fervent Zappa fan and used to hitchhike down from college to watch Zappa's week-long stint at the Palladium during Halloween season in New York City. And I pretty much stopped the first year after Steve Vai came in. My favorite Zappa band was around 1974, 1975, with Napoleon Murphy Brock and Ruth Underwood and the Fowler brothers and George Duke. And there was a tight looseness there that I don't think has ever been matched in any bands he had before or the technically more perfect bands he had after. There's something about Andy Edwards talking about music with a lot of notes in it. He calls it high information music, and he basically puts down people like me who don't like Steve Vai. We don't get it. We're not smart enough to get it. I could counter and say, well, Steve Vai's never written a melody that is at all catchy. And then Andy would say, well, catchy, and this is the weird snottiness about Andy. Catchy melodies are, kind of pop music, and we're talking about high art here. Of course, Andy also likes AC/DC, so he doesn't only like high art. But I think about this. I think about the two songs that meld together on Zappa's Roxy album, Echidna's Arf and Don't You Ever Wash That Thing. A lot of notes, a lot of stuff going on. I fucking love that section of Roxy and Elsewhere. I actually love all of Roxy and Elsewhere. But those two tracks just tickle my brain. There's just all this stuff like firing my brain, and I played it for other people who are completely left cold by it. Do I say, well, this is high information music, and you're just not able to absorb it because of your limited vocabulary and or your limited intellect? No, it's like, you don't like it. That's fine. I like Birds of Fire. I had never heard Billy Cobham's piece Flash Flood. I listened to it. I thought it was technically amazing. And I thought the time signature stuff was pretty interesting, just as I like some of Zappa's multiple time signatures. His, he didn't call it Xeno-rhythm, Xenosynchrony, I can't remember, but he would put two different rhythms or more on top of each other. I found Flash Flood to be intellectually interesting, but so busy as to be exhausting, which got me thinking that I'm a person with ADHD. And there's definitely a lot of argument these days as to whether ADHD. I kind of don't have the H, but I'm not sure I ever did. But whether that's part of the autistic spectrum or not, we certainly get obsessed the way people with Asperger's get obsessed with things. There are certain similarities. And I was in rock bands in the 70s and 80s, playing places like CBGB's and stuff. And I didn't hang out at those places too much. If I had, I might have ended up in a famous band. I lacked a lot of self-confidence, but I also just didn't circulate enough. And why is that? Because I couldn't take that much stimulus. It's interesting that Echidna's ARF and Don't You Ever Watch That Thing don't overstimulate me. Because a lot of times with music like Flash Flood, it's just too much stimulation for me. Does that mean that I'm not as intelligent as Andy Edwards, or I'm not as educated as Andy Edwards? Well, I would hazard that in my own way I'm as smart as Andy, and he's smart, so I think I'm pretty smart and pretty stupid, just so you know. I have made some absolutely stupendously bad decisions in my lifetime, and judging from what Andy has said, he has as well. But I'm a very smart guy. I'm a polymath. I can do a lot of stuff. I'm not musically educated, but somehow I can dig Zappa's really complex, busy, polyrhythmic stuff. I just don't like that Billy Cobham song, and I don't like some of the tonalities in it, like the wah-wah trumpet, or I think it's trumpet, maybe it's trombone, I can't remember. But it's just kind of like not my sound, that early fusion thing, even though it's used on the 11th House album by Larry Coryell, and I love that album. But Andy never suggests that maybe different people have different temperaments. And maybe some people literally are allergic to that much stimulation from the youngest age, right? I'm a teenager. I'm a rock musician. I'm also at the time an experimental musician. And I can't hang out at a club beyond a certain amount. God forbid going into like a discotheque with flashing lights. Shit, going into the old department store in Brooklyn, Abraham and Strauss, that was enough. There's just too many lights, too many colors, too many people. I would get overwhelmed. This is the way I'm built. And Andy's just kind of dismisses anyone who doesn't agree with him. Now, I'm an extremely opinionated person. And yes, if somebody says to me that disco is the height of musical creativity, and as somebody commented on the Rick Beato, Andy Edwards thing, that Frank Zappa basically sucks and has no redeeming value and, basically like didn't know shit, I'm going to laugh at that person. I'm going to say to myself, not to them, you're a fucking moron. If you think Donna Summer is the height of like musical, Love to Love Me Baby, if you think pretend orgasms over a completely metronomic beat is the height of musical creativity, there's not much to talk about. I'm not going to invalidate your experience. That's your thing. That's fine. But Andy's far more dismissive of that. If you don't like Steve Vai and Joe Satriani and Buckethead and all these people who go, then there's something wrong with you. Interestingly, Frank Zappa was probably very competitive with everyone. And I think his mind was blown when he toured with Mahavishnu. I think he upped his game afterwards. But he also said, well, some guitarists, and he was referring specifically, I don't think it was Holdsworth. I think it was, my brain is losing it, the guitarist who founded Mahavishnu. Sorry. Have learned how to operate a guitar like a machine gun. And I'm not impressed by that, he said. Well, that's just as snotty as Andy gets. And I think just as unfair. But it is interesting that, Zappa trashed Andy's hero in a kind of very similar way to how I personally think about Satriani. I might even do a video on it. Satriani, Steve Vai, like I say, Buckethead, forget about Yngwie Malmsteen. Ugh. It's, to me, you can try this experiment yourself and see if you have the same experience. If I go on YouTube and I play a whole bunch of videos from channels of guitar teachers and educators and commentators who are really, really good shredders. They all sound the same within 10 minutes. Like I can play a 30-second clip of each of them. There are exceptions, but they mostly all sound the same. You know, there are variations. They might be into some like really odd scales to show how educated and edgy and dissonant they are, or they might be more like straight. Not too many of them anymore are like straight blues pentatonic shredders, but they exist. But I describe it from my own experience as sound and fury signifying nothing. I remember I was doing an album and I went to a guitar solo, and the producer stopped me and he said, "Look, you went into that in fifth gear. You need to build an emotional arc." Well, I don't always agree with him. I think there are a few guitar solos that start at a million miles an hour that work. But in general, he was right. In general, you need sound dynamics, you need dynamics in the space between the notes. You need to at least understand the concept of less is more. And Frank Zappa could burn a lot of notes, but he could also play something like Sleep Dirt, which is, you know, extremely sparse. I don't I don't know why my experience of music that feels to me extremely busy, but not necessarily very complex the way Don't You Ever Wash That Thing is less than in Andy's eyes. To me, it's just different. To me, there's some shit that tickles him that doesn't tickle me. I was not an AC/DC fan. I've never owned an AC/DC album. But over the years, I started going like, you know, they're really fucking good. And I think they also wrote the greatest line in rock history. I told her to come, but she was already there. She told me to come, but I was already there. Excuse me. Of course, the guy was already there. They're a great fucking band, and they're not doing high information. They're not doing anything particularly fancy. They're doing shit that I can't technically do on guitar, but they're not doing anything that's sort of intellectually, you know, embroidered and highly educated. They're a fucking blues rock band, you know, and they're great. It's music to fuck to, music to fight to. It's fucking great. Just the way some of Zappa's or Mahavishnu's more complex stuff is great. And I like Birds of Fire. I don't happen to like it as much as Roxy. Um, and I think Zappa moved more in the Mahavishnu orchestra direction in terms of wanting perfection after he toured with Mahavishnu. And what I liked about the Roxy years, the one size fits all years, the overnight sensation years, is there was incredible musicianship, but there was a combination of looseness and tightness that I've never heard perfected to that point before. And that it went from that to just tightness. You know, Steve Vai could technically play anything. Zappa wanted, you know, a human synclavier to play the, or clavier, I don't know, I think it's clavier, to play the guitar parts. He wanted, who was it? Was it Ed Mars who played keyboards? Of course, several of his drummers were just, you know, Vinnie Colaiuta and Terry Bozzio could just play anything. I could play polyrhythms like incredibly right off the bat. Patrick O'Hearn on bass, but give me the Fowler, give me Tom Fowler on bass, give me Bruce Fowler on trombone, give me fuck it, give me George Duke and give me Napoleon Murphy Brock and give me Ruth Underwood. Give me two drummers, Chester Thompson and Ralph Humphrey. That band was on the edge of chaos and yet very tight. It's like walking that line between chaos and order where new things are born. That's where the universe makes shit. You know, that's what chaos theory is all about. Um, so, in fact, you know, they tried to figure out how birds flock and fish school. And they tried all this fancy math, and they finally realized that if they applied, I think it was 4 rules to each bird, uh, they could figure out how a flock would end up moving in synchrony. So each bird is ostensibly doing its own thing, and yet order is arising out of this bunch of brains that are not like psychically linked to each other. They're just fucking flying through the air. That's kind of like the Zappa band, bunch of really, really smart musicians who are inspired and new things come about. And Zappa often didn't give credit to other musicians, but uh, it's famous that a lot of great stuff came from his musicians, from everybody, his violin players, his drummers, his bassists, everybody, keyboard players, other guitarists. So I just want to put a different way, a different spin on it, which is, if you don't like a kind of music that I love the Bonnie Raitt album, Give It Up. Really early album, recorded near where I used to live in Bearsville, New York. I think it's her best album ever, which would probably really hurt her feelings. Every artist likes to think that their work progresses better and better. But that album has that same thing. It's got that loose tightness. It's got a bunch of people who really fucking enjoy playing with each other, impressing each other, fucking with each other, doing their thing. I don't know how much of it was recorded live and how much was overdubbed. One thing Andy said in the interview with Rick Beato that I think is really true is it's too bad that bands aren't recording live in the studio. And there's another musician named Samuel Claiborne who's down in Virginia, I think, much younger than I. He's living my life. He's touring and doing the things that I wish I'd done, but life didn't turn out that way. But I listened to some of his music and I sent him a note and I said, your stuff is great, but you should record your next album live in the studio, because you can feel that it's done track by track. I'm recording music now track by track because I don't have a band. But if I ever have a band again, there might be some overdubs, but the basic tracks for most pieces are going to be done live in the studio. There is magic there that gets lost, and things get very dry, or as Zappa would say, dweezed or tweezed. And that is a shame. It's not a shame. There's music that's been created that way that could never be created live that's super valid and super wonderful. But I think for rock and roll, it's a shame. I think, I remember I saw the band XTC. They were doing the Drums and Wires tour. This is what, in the 70s or early 80s? Probably the early 80s. I don't remember. Yeah, early 80s probably. This is when I was playing in a band that I co-founded called Things Fall Apart. And I saw them at a place, I think it was Danceteria. And I liked the album Drums and Wires a lot. But then they played live. Now, I think it was Andy Partridge, had stage fright. One of the members of the band had stage fright and hated playing live, and XTC did not play live a lot. They kind of stopped playing live as soon as they possibly could. But they were so much better. He might have hated it, but something happened between that band and the crowd and the space. And I was like, this shit should have been captured. And I think they played King Biscuit Flower Hour live once also. And I remember my ears perked up and just said, the spirit of this band is being captured better this way. But I just want to put out there that if somebody tells you that, you don't like high information music, maybe you've just got different tastes. Maybe you're not stupider or less educated or a less interesting person. You just have different taste. And I really love a lot of what Andy does. But when he goes on one of these rants, I want to tell him to, fuck off. Who the fuck made you God? Who made you decide that what Steve Vai is doing is like the be all and end all and is full of incredible, I don't know, inversions and, changes to scales and suspended 11th notes and God knows what. I don't care. If you have to understand music theory to appreciate music, I think that's a shame. That's like when I go to a museum or I've actually experienced this many times. There's an artist statement this long on the wall next to a painting, and I won't read it. I actually won a grant. I had to write an artist statement about my music. I won a New York State Foundation for the Arts grant. And I basically wrote a couple pages of art speak bullshit that I didn't believe. I pointed out a couple of valid things. But it's not even that I didn't believe it. It's that the proof is in the pudding. Oh, it's raining outside. The proof's in the pudding. Yes, a certain amount of education might get you to appreciate something more. When Zappa's album Uncle Meat came out, I listened to it over and over because I was like, damn it, I love Frank and I'm not digging this album. And I listened to it over and over again, and lo and behold, I really came to love that album. So this is true. But there's other stuff that just doesn't, it's either too much stimulation, like that Billy Cobham song Flash Flood. Like it's too incessant. I didn't even listen to the whole thing too, because I was like, I'm being bombarded. It feels like a sensory attack. I understand the artistry and I understand that the structure is really interesting, but the best music to me falls into one of two categories. It's either emotional only, right? It's John Lee Hooker playing a note that just makes you remember the time your girlfriend left you, you know? It just fucking rips your heart out of you, or when your mom died. It's totally emotional from a guy who doesn't know shit from Shinola about music theory. He just knows how to translate emotion through his fingertips into a guitar. Or it's emotional and intellectual. And a lot of people say that Zappa is only intellectual. So maybe so. Maybe Echidna's Arf and Don't You Ever Watch That Thing aren't emotional. To me, they're emotional because they have a sense of humor. They're not poignant. They're not something that, goes right to your heart center, but they're zany. There's a kind of playful, zany brio to a lot of Zappa's music, including a lot of the classical music, like the Yellow Shark, G Spot Tornado. It's really big. There's a lot of notes going on. Somehow it doesn't overwhelm me. Don't know why, because I'm built that way. But it also has this verve and this sense of humor. It's, to me, the most mature people are very serious and very silly. And people who are only serious are not actually mature. They're actually some weird form of arrested development where they decided that that's what being a grown-up was, and they forgot about a childlike sense of awe. They forgot about zaniness and silliness. And Zappa never forgot that. So to me, Zappa's music is emotional. There are very few pieces, Sleep Dirt is one of them, that are poignant. And I played Sleep Dirt over and over the day Zappa died, and I just cried. It's a beautiful piece. It doesn't finish, it kind of falls apart. It's beautiful. And it's blues. So, that's where Zappa started, was with blues and R&B. I generally do not like music that is merely intellectual. I'm trying to think. I mean, Bach, an argument could be made that a lot of Bach's music is really intellectual because it's like it's like math. And it actually, some of Bach's music and some of the music on Roxy and elsewhere kind of remind me of each other. Maybe that seems weird, but they're both very mathematical and structured. So I was going to say, if it's purely intellectual, I'm not interested. Maybe it's impossible to make that distinction because clearly the intellectual music that Andy listens to, like Joe Satriani or Steve Vai, I presume that produces an emotional reaction. It's funny because I hear a lot of Steve Vai and Satriani play what I consider to be guitar melisma. Do you know what melisma is? It's the stuff that singers do that they overdo. Mariah Carey. It's just like it's like so overdone so often. It's sort of like over emotional to the point of not even being emotional, but being gestural. I find that of Steve Vai and his ilk. I even find it on like Cliffs of Dover. I find these pieces that have these sort of soaring guitar parts that a lot of people respond to emotionally. And for me, they're shtick. To me, they're gestures. To me, they're hackneyed. To me, they do not cut to the bone the way, I don't know, any old great blues song does. Or even Frank Sinatra singing I'm a Fool to Want You. Or Sarah Vaughan singing It Ain't No Use. Oh my God. Oh my God, that song's just like so bloody real. She's not doing any little fucking Baroque curlicues in the air with her voice. She's just fucking testifying. I'm fucking done with you, dude. We are done. It's incredible. But your mileage may vary. You might listen to Mariah Carey and think she's the shit. I can't stand her. Such is life. Does that mean I'm smarter than you? Fuck no. It means we have different taste. If a certain amount of music feels like a barrage to me, a sensory barrage, like somebody's shining strobes in my face, well, that's just the way I'm built, And the fact that some high information music, like some Zappa, doesn't do that to me, well, I guess that's the way I'm built too. But Andy's kind of thing is if you don't appreciate Steve Vai, then you're just not smart enough. And it's funny because I really love his channel, but when he comes across with that shit, I find it so fucking patronizing. Of course, it probably gets people like me to view more because we get pissed, right? And nothing engages people like pissing them off. But for me, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. Like what you like. And if you're super educated and you still don't like Joe Satriani, or if you can't read music and know nothing about music theory and you love Joe Satriani, it's all good, right? Whatever works for you works for you. And whatever works for me works for me. And I'm going to start doing more videos that talk about what works for me. And the next video I do, which given the insanity of copyright abuse by copyright holders on YouTube, it'll probably get me in trouble. But I'm going to do my favorite guitar solos where you've either probably never heard the guitar solo, never really thought about it, or you thought somebody else played it. I don't know if that's going to be 10 or more solos, but interesting bits of guitar work. And none of them are going to be shredders. There's not going to be anybody playing a million miles an hour. Zappa could play pretty fast with the most bizarre picking technique I've ever seen in my life. And one of my favorite solos of all time is going to be on there, and it's a Zappa solo. But there's not going to be any speed demons on there. I'm just not impressed. I went to Carnegie Hall a few years ago and I saw, can't remember this guy's name, German guy playing Beethoven, solo piano. And it was kind of like a rock concert. He went really fast. Everyone was like, whoa, boy, whoa. They were all like blown away. I was like, too fast, too fast. You're fucking showing off and you're losing the spirit of the music. People who like electronic dance music, drums, too perfect, too fucking perfect. I want to not only hear a human playing drums, I'd really like to hear a human playing drums who's keying into the bass player and vice versa. That's why I like recording in the studio so much, even though you don't get the same fidelity, you don't get the same control, but you get the vibe. If you're in a band like I was twice in my life with loons in the monastery and things fall apart, where you're reading each other's minds and you're taking each other to new places and you're not afraid to fuck around and you're not afraid to be serious and you're not afraid to be silly. There's just nothing like it. It's better than sex. And sex is just about my favorite thing. So there you go. It's even better than that. It's a level of intimacy that is physical and intellectual and emotional all at once. It's quite something. At any rate, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you take everything I say and Andy says and Rick Beato says with a grain of salt. It's just an opinion. We're no better than you are. I think I'm a smart guy. I also think I'm probably the world's stupidest smart guy ever because I've done so many just god-awful stupid things in my life. Whatever floats your boat. Listen to what you love. If you like my next few videos, maybe you'll find new stuff that you love that you didn't know about. That would be the best thing I could do. The best thing I could do would be to turn you on to something you've either heard before and never paid attention to, or you've never heard before and you're like, damn, I love that. I remember I was living in Oregon. I was like 18, and there was a rock station that would do requests. And I requested the Frank Zappa song Inca Roads from the One Size Fits All album, which is my favorite guitar solo of all time, which is interesting because it's a studio album with the guitar solo from a live performance flown in and edited. And when you hear the live performance, which is on the Helsinki concert, part of the You Can't Do That on Stage Anymore collection, he edited out the parts where he wandered. Like, he really did an incredible editing job because the version on One Size Fits All is perfect. And the little bit where he gets like a little meandery, he cut it out. It's perfect. But I bitched at that fucking radio station for like 3 weeks. I call in, be the first caller during the lunchtime request hour, play Inca Roads, play Inca Roads, play Inca Roads. Why aren't you playing Inca Roads? I keep asking you to play Inca Roads. Finally, after like 3 weeks, they played it. And you know what happened? A bajillion people called in and said, play that shit again. Because they'd never heard anything like it. Because that kind of music, what Frank Zappa music got on the radio, Valley Girl and Don't Eat That Yellow Snow. I mean, I don't know if it upset Frank. He was probably laughing all the way to the bank. But that's what made it onto radio. Not Inca Roads, no, not the stuff on Roxy, not even Penguin in Bondage on Roxy, which is pretty fucking funny. None of, so at any rate, what you like is what you like. And hopefully I'll introduce you to some stuff that you haven't heard. And if you haven't heard it, go to the streaming or album of your choice, album reproduction system, CD, vinyl, whatever. If you have One Size Fits All, or you have Spotify, the evil Spotify, or Apple Music, look up the song Inca Roads. There's a live version, and there's the studio version with the live solo, the edited live solo in it. Listen to the version on One Size Fits All, which is a great studio album. Listen to how that song speeds up. It sounds like it goes from, if you're talking vinyl, from 33 to 45 RPM. Speeds up and speeds up and speeds up. And listen to this guitar solo. Actually, I'm really glad I mentioned this. That guitar solo goes through emotions. There's a part that sounds angry. There's a part that sounds self-righteous. There's a part that sounds tentative, almost fragile. There's a part that sounds triumphant. The emotional arc ends with this sort of triumphant little flourishing at the end that goes into what Frank called his Bulgarian bagpipe effect, which is artificial harmonics he screws out with a pick. That guitar solo is emotional to me, man. It's not just like, look at all the fancy scales I know. Look at all the music theory I know. And Frank knew more music theory, on the back of one hand than most musicians will ever know in their lives. Nope, there's emotion there. There's structure, there's exploration, there's creativity, and as Frank said, there's composing on the fly, right? He never played the same solo twice. He didn't go, I'm going to give you the solo from the album. Fuck no. He said, I'm going to go out there, and sometimes I'm going to be on the high wire. I'm going to fall on my ass, and other times I'm going to fly. And I've heard him play some really bad solos. I've heard him get lost. But that's why he got so good, because, he was a little self-indulgent with the audience. He'd play for us, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. He was learning on the job, and we were watching him learn. All right, that's it for now. Yes, I am wearing a Frank Zappa shirt. Weasels Ripped My Flesh. Great album with the amazing Don Sugarcane Harris playing violin on Directly From My Heart to You. A super simple song with no intellectually stimulating structure to it. Just like what you like, and don't listen to anybody tell you that you're not sophisticated or you're not smart enough because something doesn't work for you. And by the same token, every now and then give something you don't like, 20 listens, like I did with Uncle Meat. And maybe you'll be like, oh, wow. I actually plan on doing that with that Billy Cobham album. And I plan on listening to more Alan Holdsworth, who I don't like. I appreciate his ability, but just doesn't get to me. He just sounds like he's kind of being dissonant on purpose. I really like dissonance. I use it a lot in my own music, but it's like, let me be dissonant every third note to show you how like edgy and 20th century modern classical composer influenced I am. That's what it sounds like to me. It sounds very much in the head. I like stuff that comes from the gut and the heart and the balls, or the womb if you happen to be female. All right, take care.